welcome to Games from Folktales, a podcast that mixes historical research and tabletop role-playing settings. I'm your host, Timothy Ferguson. This week, the start of a new series based on the works of Lord Dunsany. Lord Dunsany provided dozens of plot hooks and monsters for the early episodes of this podcast. His works also provided material for the longest episode. In my fossicking, I took the easy pieces in his short story collections and left his novels alone. I thought them insufficiently fantastical. I was, however, mistaken. Time to remedy my error. This episode begins dissecting Don Rodriguez, The Chronicles of Shadow Valley, Dunsany's first novel. It's a little like Ray Bradbury's novels in that you can see it's a series of short pieces that have been stitched together. We begin by meeting our protagonist, who is called Rodriguez Trinidad Fernandez Concepcion Henrique Maria, in a section I've cut from what follows. He might make a fine companion to any covenant. I'll be cutting some of the more florid patches of the work, although I encourage you to check them out. Generally, where I've cut a section, I'll mark it with it's meant to be a guitar string sound, but it's artificial. Our reader is Ed Humple, who gave these recordings to the public through LibriVox. Long-term listeners will remember Ed's voice from some of our earlier forays beyond the fields we know. And Ed's voice is quite distinct from mine, so I won't save my comments for the end. I'll be popping in to interrupt the flow of the narrative with plot hooks. And now, to the Golden Age of Spain.
After long and patient research, I am still unable to give to the reader of these chronicles the exact date of the times that they tell of. Were it merely a matter of history, there could be no doubts about the period. But where magic is concerned, to however slight an extent, there must always be some element of mystery, arising partly out of ignorance, and partly from the compulsion of those oaths by which magic protects its precincts from the tiptoe of curiosity. Moreover, magic, even in small quantities, appears to affect time, much as acids affect some metals, curiously changing its substance, until dates seem to melt into a mercurial form that renders them elusive even to the eye of the most watchful historian. Being convinced that his end was nearly come, and having lived long on earth, and all those years in Spain in the golden time, the lord of the valleys of Argento Jerez, whose heights see not Valladolid, called for his eldest son.
The lordship is fictional, but Valladolid really exists. It was the capital of Spain under Ferdinand and Isabella, and before that, for a while, it was the capital of Castile. It's in the northwest of modern Spain.
And so he addressed him when he was come to his chamber, dim with its strange red hangings, and august with the splendour of Spain. O eldest son of mine, your younger brother being dull and clever, on whom those traits that women love have not been bestowed by God, and know, my eldest son, that here on earth, and for aught I know hereafter, but certainly here on earth, these women be the arbiters of all things, and how this be so God knoweth only, for they are vain and variable, yet it is surely so. Your younger brother then not having been given those ways that women prize, for himself he will win nothing, and therefore I leave him these my valleys, for not unlikely it was some sin of mine that his spirit was visited with dullness, as Holy Writ sets forth, the sins of the fathers being visited on the children, and thus I make him amends. But to you I leave my long, most flexible, ancient Castilian blade, which infidels dreaded, if old songs be true. Merry and lithe it is, and its true temper singeth when it meets another blade, as two friends sing when met after many years. It is most subtle, nimble, and exultant, and what it will not win for you in the wars, that shall be won for you by your mandolin, for you have a way with it that goes well with the old airs of Spain.
Here we see signs of the flux in time which Dunsany noted at the beginning. There are no mandolins in Spain before the 18th century because there aren't mandolins anywhere before that time. They're a relatively late descendant of the lute. Either this family has an instrument that no one else has, which would explain how they get away with so much because of its music, or the thing he has is actually a lute.
And choose, my son, rather a moonlit night, when you sing under those curved balconies that I knew, ah me, so well. For there is much advantage in the moon. In the first place, maidens see in the light of the moon, especially in the spring, more romance than you might credit, for it adds for them a mystery to the darkness which the night has not when it is merely black. And if any statue should gleam on the grass near by, or if the magnolia be in blossom, or even the nightingale singing, or if anything be beautiful in the night, in any of these things also there is advantage. For a maiden will attribute to her lover all manner of things that are not his at all, but are only outpourings from the hand of God.
The old man seems to be instructing his son in how to develop situational bonuses for his music role there. Also, there is no magnolia tree that arrives in Spain via the Columbian exchange. It's possible the old man, in his dying, is passing on a knack virtue to his son through his advice.
There is this advantage also in the moon, that, if interrupters come, the moonlight is better suited to the play of a blade than the mere darkness of the night. Indeed, but the merry play of my sword in the moonlight was often a joy to see, it so flashed, so danced, so sparkled. In the moonlight also one makes no unworthy stroke, but hath scope for those fair passes that Sebastiani taught, which were long ago the wonder of Madrid.
I have no idea if this sword's master Sebastiani is real. I presume not. I do know there is a hermetic dueling school of a similar name, the School of Sebastian. San Sebastian is a place. It's the centre of the Basque territory in the north of Spain, and this saint, as a defender of plague victims and soldiers, was popular in the latter medieval period.
The old lord paused, and breathed for a little space, as it were gathering breath for his last words to his son. He breathed deliberately, then spoke again. "I leave you," he said, "well content that you have the two accomplishments, my son, that are most needful in a Christian man, skill with the sword and a way with the mandolin. There be other arts indeed among the heathen, for the world is wide and hath full many customs, but these two alone are needful." And then, with that grand manner that they had at that time in Spain, although his strength was failing, he gave to his eldest son his Castilian sword. He lay back then in the huge carved canopied bed, his eyes closed, the red silk curtains rustled, and there was no sound of his breathing. But the old lord's spirit, whatever journey it proposed, lingered yet in its ancient habitation, and silence fell again with scarcely the sound of breathing. Then, gathering up his strength for the last time and looking at his son, "The sword to the wars," he said, "the mandolin to the balconies." With that he fell back dead. Now there were no wars at that time, so far as was known in Spain, but the old lord's eldest son, regarding those last words of his father as a commandment, determined then and there in that dim vast chamber to gird his legacy to him, and seek for the wars, wherever the wars might be, so soon as the obsequies of the sepulchre were ended.
Failing to fulfill the dying request of a person has always been considered to cause ill luck. How that happens in mythic Europe's not entirely clear. It could be a conditional curse, it could be a minor miracle, or it could be psychopompic fairies dwelling nearby and causing those who break the story to suffer.
And of those obsequies I tell not here, for they are fully told in the black books of Spain, and the deeds of that old lord's youth are told in the golden stories. The Book of Maidens mentions him, and again we read of him in the gardens of Spain.
To have a think about these books, I don't think the black books of Spain exist. If you are thinking of the golden legends, when we read golden stories, then that gives us as its counter the black legend, which is a historiographic dispute which kicked off before Dunsany wrote this novel. At its core, it's the idea that Spain is used as a whipping boy by foreign historians. When the Spanish go to the New World and ransack the place, they're called conquerors and vandals and monsters. But when the British or French do exactly the same thing, They're colonists or founders or traders. The Book of Maidens might be a reference to the Book of the City of Ladies by Christian de Pizan. Alternatively, it might be a reference to De Mulieris Claris, which is Concerning Famous Women, by Boccaccio. Either way, it might explain the older man's idea that women are the true masters of things. These were early works that advocated the education of and respect for women. The Gardens of Spain is a puzzle. There is a classical piece of music called Nights in the Garden of Spain, which is meant to evoke Sufi mystical dances in the third section. I can't place the book. There is a book of that title, but it's far later. It's by a New Zealand author.
So he was buried, and his eldest son fared forth with his legacy dangling from his girdle in its long, straight, lovely scabbard, blue velvet, with emeralds on it, fared forth on foot along a road of Spain. Upon his back he had slung his mandolin. And all the way he went, the young man looked at the flame of those southern flowers, flashing on either side of him all the way, as though the rainbow had been broken in heaven, and its fragments fallen on Spain. All the way as he went he gazed at those flowers, the first anemones of the year, and long after, whenever he sang to old airs of Spain, he thought of Spain as it appeared that day in all the wonder of spring. The memory lent a beauty to his voice and a wistfulness to his eyes that accorded not ill with the theme of the songs he sang, and were more than once to melt proud hearts deemed cold.
He's developing some sort of virtue here. Possibly by going through the fields of anemones, he's developing free expression. If so, that's odd. This is perhaps a vis source?
And so gazing, he came to a town that stood on a hill, before he was yet tired, though he had done nigh 20 of those flowery miles of Spain. And since it was evening, and the light was fading away, he went to an inn and drew his sword in the twilight and knocked with the hilt of it on the oaken door. The name of the inn was the Dragon and Knight. A light was lit in one of the upper windows. The darkness seemed to deepen at that moment. A step was heard coming heavily down a stairway.
And there, on the very doorstep of an infernally tainted inn, we leave our young hero. His statistics will be given on the blog that accompanies the podcast. Next month, when we return to the Chronicles, he hires a terrible servant, who is also suited as a companion or grog, after he dispatches the evil of the inn, making it a suitable site for a spring covenant with a bit of spirit. Your saga may vary.